for the workshop, for the remainder of the workshop, I was going to walk through the tutorial for AI Dungeon to explain to people how it works, so they can get a brief understanding of it. And then I wanted to allow people to play with it with very little guidance, write down some of their observations, maybe about like where it fails and what things surprised them, and what things they didn't like. And then at the end of the workshop, we could discuss some of the things that they observed, and what new understandings we can glean from those observations that we've had. Here, I'm going to walk through the tutorial. So basically, here, this is the home screen. You can just ask, like, you have a couple options here, whether you can continue the last game you were working on to a new game, create world. I'll explain what that means later. Or you can, there's also like a multiplayer mode, which is cool. You can just like generate the story with multiple people at the same time. We're going to just walk through this tutorial right here. So let's start with the basics. I've done all of these before, that's why it says redo. But we're just going to walk through it. So first, we start with something called a scenario. You can think of this as like an advanced kind of prompt for GPT-3. Basically, this game is backed by default, it's backed by GPT-2. If you look in the settings here, you can set different settings. Here, there's a section that's called AI model type. There are 3 options. There's classic, Griffin, and Dragon. The classic is original GPT-2. Griffin is also GPT-2 based. I think they didn't elaborate very much. I literally talked to the company about this and they did not tell me much. But I think it's just a more sophisticated in-house version of GPT-2 that's specifically built off of fantasy text. And then Dragon is GPT-3. You will only have access to the Dragon model if you pay for the premium version. I'm not going to make you guys pay for the premium subscription. It's only $10 to do it. I don't know how much it is over there. They probably maybe changed the price, but it's only $10 so it's probably, I mean, it's worth it, and for at least for me. But again, I'm not going to make you do it. Working with the Griffin model is just fine for the purposes of this class. Okay. So back to the tutorial. It's a bit of a tangent just then. We're going to walk through the basics of creating an adventure in the game. So let's just do space exploration as a scenario. So it'll give me a prompt about space exploration. So a couple things here. Here we see this dialogue. This right here is what you can think of as the prompt. The AI is fed this prompt and is going to, now we want to start our story. So here it says we're the commander on a spaceship called Harbinger. You've been traveling through the melogenic clouds when you find a strange planet near a dying star. While most of your crew is in hibernation, you and a few of your flight crew keep things running. As you scan the planet and add it to your chart, your navigator detects a signal coming from the planet. It's weak, but it's clearly not natural. So what we're going to do here is, in the top right corner, we can see an objective to do an action. So what we basically want to do is we have 3 different modes. There's do, say, and story. So do can just be seen as like you write an action and the AI interprets that action and adds it into the story. So I can say like investigate signal or something like that. And then it will try to interpret what that means and how that would fit into the story. The AI basically generates the piece that would go into the story after that based off of that action. Say is literally just dialogue. And then story would be just as if you were just writing after this prompt. You're just directly stating what's happening in the story. So what we're going to do is we're going to perform some action. Okay, so now there's a bunch of dialogue. So I told it to investigate a signal and interpreted that as you send a shuttle onto the planet's surface. The shuttle crew reports they have found an alien building made of black stone. The signal is coming from inside the building. You send in a remote drone to investigate. So it's building off the story based off of my choice to do an investigation on the signal. So this is all generated by the AI. Yada, yada, yada. So next, we're going to try to do a say action. And so we can just click, again, we just click on this little button here on the bottom left to change it to say. Let's submit a new move. Let's see, let's say, let's ask what's inside the building. There it goes. The drone sends back images of a strange machine. The machine is made up of a series of spinning rings. It's connected to a strange chair with many wires and tubes attached to it. So this is, again, all AI generated. It is creating this story on the fly based off of the last couple pieces of the story it's seen. It's pretty cool. You can kind of do a lot with this. You are kind of limitless in possibilities. Obviously, this game is oriented more towards sci-fi fantasy storylines and whatnot, but you can talk about anything you want. There's lots of scenarios people make of, like, you know, just being in a coffee shop or walking through a school or something like that. So for the next part of the tutorial, we're gonna try a story. So rather than saying or doing something, we're gonna directly write out the next part of the story. That could be an action, it could be a piece of dialogue, but it could be anything you want. You have a lot more freedom when you just use the story mode. Let's see, what do we want to do? Let's sit in the chair. Okay, so a couple things here. You can see here that the language that I'm using is a lot more intricate and descriptive than what I was saying before. In general, this is good practice. It's good practice to use very descriptive language when describing what you're doing. The more descriptive, the more clear and more creative that you get, the more creative your output's going to be. Like we said before, the AI is trying to pattern match, right? So if you write one-word sentences, it's going to respond with one-word sentences. It's not going to be a very interesting story if you do that. It gets a lot more interesting the more detail that you include. So we're going to see what it comes out with this. Okay, so now it's saying that some sort of screen pops up and there is some sort of face that's talking to us. Interesting. Let's just ask who it is. So again, I'm writing here, and I'm including details that aren't super necessary, but they add a bit to the story, right? So what we want here is we want to basically add to the tone and write the kind of tone that we want out of our story. As I said, if we write one-word responses, all we're going to get are one-word responses. If we use an interesting tone and the tone that we want out of our story, we're going to receive that same feedback from the AI. So what I'm trying to do here is be a bit more descriptive and write things as I would if I was reading a story that I wanted to read. So this is what we have here. There's elements of, it's not just a game. Basically, it's a lot more complicated than being a simple game. There's elements of creativity in writing. And the better that you write and the more creative that you use your writing, the the more interesting and fun experience you're going to get. Okay, so this, whatever this thing was on the screen, whoops, cancel. Apparently this thing, this face that we saw is the guide, and I actually keep clicking this, and it's here to help us on a journey. What journey? We have no idea what the journey is. And we're looking for something called the door. No idea what that means. Let's try to flip back to do, see what happens. But right now we're seeing a piece of a dialogue that's occurring. Do. Let's see. Let's have the person. Let's get more details about what the door is. As you'll soon learn, the do action is a little bit limited. You don't get to incorporate as much creativity when you use something like do, because the AI has to interpret your action, and it writes whatever it thinks should follow from that action. So it says the guide explains the doors on the end of the tunnel at the heart of the planet. The tunnel is very long and goes through the very core of the planet. Okay, what else do we want? What does it want us to do next? Continue without typing anything? Oh, yeah, so you can continue without typing anything as well if you're stumped, or it seems like the AI is leaving you at the point where it should be feeding you more information and you don't really know what to do. Say you are doing something, or you say something, and the AI fills in your next response. If you want the AI to just continue to feed you information, you can just hit enter with a blank input. So right here, I'm just gonna, and it doesn't make a difference whether you do this on do, say, or story. Blank is just blank. You can enter and see what happens. And sometimes it takes a couple moments to wait. The last part of the planet tunnel is underwater. And then it goes on to add in a piece of dialogue for us. But why am I here? You're here to open the door. Somewhat repetitive at times. But you can see here, like, that the AI will also fill in the dialogue for you. So with most games, you are a protagonist going throughout a world, right? You only are affecting actions around you as that protagonist, as that agent. And this is a little bit different. You're not just an agent. You're kind of just writing a story. And you might like to think of yourself as being that an agent or the protagonist in that story, but really just writing a story about a protagonist. And the AI is helping you write that story about the protagonist. So you will end up writing parts of the story yourself, rather than just affecting actions in the world around you. This may be kind of complicated and hard to understand, but I think you'll get a pretty good intuitive understanding once you get to play around with it for yourself. Let's see. I think it just wants us to enter in one more thing. Okay. Great. Tutorial is done. So that was just the first basic introduction into the tutorial. I'm gonna say that it's been half an hour already. In about 15 minutes, we're gonna take a quick break. So what I want to do is because this is like such a long thing. Every like 50 minutes or so, I want to try like take a 10-minute break. Also, if anybody have any questions before I continue, this virtual lecture format is a little bit different for me because I can't really see y'all's reaction or get feedback. So if any of y'all are waiting for questions, let me know. And feel free to interrupt me as well.
Okay.
Great. If there's no questions, we'll keep going. Is this making sense to everybody? If I'm going too fast either, also let me know. Otherwise, we're going to continue. So this next tutorial is about the edit feature. So sometimes the AI can falter, and sometimes it needs a little bit of help. For the purposes of this, I'm going to switch to the GPT-2 model. Right now, I think I'm on the Dragon model. So I'm going to switch to Griffin, and we will move on. So learning edit. You wake up in the hospital, and your head hurts, and you've got random tubes in your arm. Lights are flickering for some reason, and you hear screaming. You rip the tubes out of your arm and stumble towards the door to see what's going on. Out in the hallway, you see some patients eating some doctors. So we seem to be stumbling on a zombie story. You wake up at a hospital, like kind of like the dialogue of The Walking Dead, basically. Presumably, the protagonist has not realized we're in a zombie situation yet, but let's do a couple of actions. Basically, what we're trying to get here is to see the AI mess up so we can fix it. Okay, so see some response, could be better. If you ever get a response from the AI that you don't like, you can always use this feature here called retry. So here at the bottom right tab, you can hit this button, and it will just try to regenerate the last output that it had. So we're going to hit retry and see if it gets us something better. So it says that there's 2 doors down the hall from your room. One has a sign that says men's room, and the other has a sign that says children's ward. So if I'm not satisfied with this, I can just hit redo again, or sorry, retry again. If sometimes though that can get a bit annoying, especially if you know exactly what you want. Let's say that I think that it should say instead of children's ward, it should say women's room. I can just go in here and delete this. So all you have to do is go in, click on the section you want to change. In fact, actually, you just hit the edit button as well. That works too. So I can just say the other says not want to be capitalized. Let's say I actually don't like this either. Let's say the other one says ICU. And we can hit the arrow on the right. All right, after editing the one, we can do another action. So basically all we did was go back and rewrite the last action. Nothing else has occurred. This only matters for future actions. We want to walk towards ICU. Great, so now we've successfully rewritten the past. It's pretty simple. You can just go back and edit things. It's not very complicated. Okay, you walk into the ICU, you pass through the ICU into the hallway and find a doctor. He looks at you and says, "You must be the new intern." You nod, he smiles and says, blank, and then keep going. So if at any point we get to a point in the story that we don't like, say we've gone through several actions and we say, you know what, I don't really like this point in the story that we're at. I want to go back to a point I was before and choose something else to do. To do that, you can use the undo button. So you can just undo the last action and choose to do something else. You can do this multiple times if you want, but we're just going back once. And if you want to undo your undo, you can do a redo. So say we undid something and we haven't chosen any new action, we can just go back and hit redo again. And we're back where we were earlier. Pretty intuitive, I think. Okay, so now let's just do a couple more actions. asking what the hell is going on and why he's asking about me being an intern. Also, you don't need to use quotes in the say part. It'll automatically add quotes for you. After he explains the situation, you realize it's your responsibility to save lives. You return to the emergency room. The hospital is locked down, but an orderly is still available to help. Okay, great. We've basically gotten through this tutorial. Let's go to the next one. Any questions about this so far? Basically, it's just showing you different tools to be able to edit and undo pieces of the past in the story. So being able to manipulate different parts of the story in your storyline and the linearity of your story. If there's no questions, we can move on to the next one.
Everything is clear.
Awesome, great. Next, we'll go into memory. The next couple ones are going to get a little bit more complicated. Don't worry too much now if it doesn't totally make sense. We're going to go into a lot more detail about them tomorrow in the introductory lecture tomorrow. Okay, so here we're going to talk about, we're back in the space exploration scenario. We're going to talk about a new feature called memory. So you can think of memory as basically just being text that's always shown to the AI. So if we're looking at it if we're thinking about it like a prompt, there's the scenario, which includes maybe like the last couple of actions and pieces of dialogue that you've seen. But as the story progresses, the earlier parts of the story are going to be not erased, but the AI is not going to see them because it's too long. So whenever we progress through the story, only the most recent actions are seen by the AI. But if we're talking about, if we want to have a linear narrative, we can't let the AI forget that we're on, like, say, a quest or something like that. We want it to understand the underlying purpose of the dialogue that's going on and the actions that are going on right now. So to do that, we need a piece of text that's always shown to the AI. That's what our memory is. So the memory is meant to keep in important events that have occurred and the purpose of the things that are going on at the moment. So you can edit the memory using this button here. It just has a little thumbtack on it. It's called pen. And we have here a piece of text where we just include some basic facts about what's going on right now in the story. You're in the spaceship Harbinger, a Titan-class exploration ship. You are the commander. You want to keep the ship in orbit, but you also want to investigate the source of the radio signal. Basically, just quick background, telling the AI who I am, and keeping the ship in orbit, or just basic purpose about keeping the ship in orbit, but wanting to investigate something that's going on. The AI does not remember anything from past dialogue. So if I enter a completion about me going in and playing a zombie, and then have another dialogue about space exploration, it won't have any memory of the last dialogues where I talked about playing zombies. It doesn't have any idea what we're talking about. It only has access to the information you give it at any given point in time. So while it may look like we're going through a linear narrative, the certain parts of the story would not be shown to the AI, and the AI will not know about them, and it won't remember anything about them. So we have to make this memory section is very important for keeping the AI on track for what we're doing. So here we have a pre-written piece of memory. There's some information about your spaceship in there. Do an action that mentions your ship and see what happens. So let's say observe ship and see what happens. So presumably we want it to take something from the memory and show to us that it understands what it is and it has information about it. So here's an example of where the AI kind of fails. I say to assure this, and this is also kind of why do is not the best action, is not the best button to use all the time. I think people have different philosophies about this, but a lot of people, including myself, like to stick to just using the story, because with do, again, the AI is interpreting what you're doing. So there's an extra layer of generation. There's like basically a prompt that takes your action, your do action, and generates the actual piece of story based off of that do action, rather than just using it directly. So sometimes when you enter an action, it'll end up doing something that you don't intend. So if I say observe ship, it's going to interpret that as observing the planet, which is not what we wanted. We wanted to observe the ship, not the planet. But why don't we, so we can undo that. And then sometimes this will pop up and they'll ask us, how's it going? It's going pretty good. So instead of observing the ship, we're going to edit this. And we're just going to say, we're going to directly write the story instead. And then to get it to generate something after this, we're just going to enter a blank piece. So again, it generates something about the planet, which is, again, not what we want. But it does say that our ship will not last long there without the right equipment. It's also crawling with hostile life. So let's, it says the next piece of the quest is to add a sentence about a meteor to the memory. Let's say let's just say that there's a meteor that's threatening to crash into the ship. Okay. Let's try an action now, see if it pops up. We're going to stick to story. Okay, so right now we have we're adding a piece of story that says we're looking around our ship, looking for any threats. Presumably what should pop up, because we said in the memories that there's a meteor on track to crash into the ship. Hopefully what pops up next is going to be some sort of text that mentions the fact that there's a meteor popping, that will be threatening our ship. So let's see if that happens. And this dialog box pops up a lot. Nothing pops up about the meteor. Let's see if we can retry that. Again, nothing. And sometimes it's going to take a lot of tries before something pops up. Anyway, so this is one of the things about the AI. Sometimes it's not going to do what you want. You need to try different things, and hopefully things will happen the way you want, and sometimes things won't. I said here that there's a meteor on track to crash into the ship, and I'm trying to guide it in a way that will help it to observe that fact. Right now, it's not really wanting to do it. Let's see if we can maybe, this could also be because we're using the GPT-2 model rather than the GPT-3. I wonder if, it's not guaranteed, but if we switch to the GPT-3 model, maybe it will generate something about the meteor. So it's saying your sensors are picking up a few pieces of debris and a large creature, something so big they could take up a continent on your home planet. I think by creature, it really just means it might be trying to refer to the rock. Let's try to observe it more. Maybe it is, maybe it'll pop something up about the meteor. Okay, it's again talking about a creature. Let's see if we can undo this. We got close last time. Let's do retry. And there it is. Here we see a nearby asteroid belt. If you divert the trajectory of one of the asteroids, you could use it as a weapon, yada, yada, yada. So here we finally get something that mentions like a meteor or an asteroid. Close enough. It's enough to show us that it is probably pulling this information from the memory. Again, it's not perfect, and it takes a lot of experience to be able to pull what you want from this and get the AI to do what you want and lead it in the direction that you want. This is enough for this tutorial. We can move on to the next one now. So we just went over the basics. We learned how to edit and undo things, basically to be able to change the past of the story. And we've learned how to do a little bit of memory, so how to keep track of things in the story with mixed results. Now we're going to jump into world info, which is basically the last one. The learn help is really a tutorial, but so we can go into this now. So when you want to build a story, you need to build a scene, right? It needs to be a setting. And the setting, it's hard to give the AI all the information that you need in your setting without taking up a ton of room, right? Like I said before, you're maxed out at about 1,000 words between the prompt and the response. If you try to feed in all of the information about your world at a time, you're gonna not have very much room for dialogue and the parts of the story that are relevant that you're going through. So to get around this, AI Dungeon uses this technique, which allows anytime, basically you can specify keywords and describe those keywords. And anytime those keywords pop up, the description that you use is filled in to the prompt. So let's say we say something about the cathedral, and let's say the cathedral, it means something to us. Or in this example, let's say planet. So we are in a spaceship going through space, and we are pulling up this planet. Now this planet has a backstory, right? There's information about it. It's a planet populated by insectoid race, so it's apparently like some insects or something, some sort of primitive aliens that live on there, and some other basic information. Anytime the word planet is mentioned in the prompt, AI Dungeon will automatically fill in this entry into that prompt to replace it. Quite literally just taking that piece planet and is going to replace it with this body of text. So this allows the AI to understand what it means contextually anytime we mention the word planet. It adds this piece of text to the context. And this is important so that it understands how you might react in some situations. So if we say, go to the planet, it might respond with something like the insectoid race will attack you, because it says in the entry that it'll attack any visitors and try to steal the supply. We have similar keys for the spaceship's name, something about the signal, a description of the signal. Although this is not really good practice because every time you mention, every dialogue basically mentions the word you in it. So you kind of want to keep this information in memory most of the time. Ship, captain, Carl, your advisor, yada, yada, yada. And you can add more if you want. You can add, it might not be unlimited, but you can add quite a bit of world information. And it can be very useful when trying to create a complicated and deep and elaborate world for your story to take place in. So let's go back here. It says we want to go for the entry for Carl and change Carl's last name from Light Star to Dark Star. So what we're going to do is go away. Hit the world info button once more. Scroll down to where we say Carl, and it says Carl Lightstar. We're going to change his name to Darkstar. Great. Now we're going to go back. It automatically saves itself, so we don't need to worry about that. Go back, and then let's ask Carl what his last name is. There we go. Bam, pulls up Darkstar, because whenever the AI saw that Carl was mentioned, it added the entry that we have in the world information to the world context, or the AI's context, basically. So it understood that his last name was Darkstar. I was able to pull that information and come up with an appropriate response. Great. Now let's add a pet with the key of Fido and whatever we want after that. So Fido, and we'll say Fido is your. Typically, you want to stick to second person in this. It's supposed to simulate feeling like a protagonist walking through this adventure. Fido is your we'll say he's a mix between a grizzly bear and a cat. I don't know, something random. Great. Let's see if we can get him to talk about Fido, or the AI to talk about Fido. Story. Let's start with this relatively incomplete sentence. We'll add this to the story, and we'll see if it can complete this and say something about Fido. Did I mention that it was a pet, or did I see? Right. So okay, here it's saying you observe Fido making note of his size and strength, and it says he's a big man, but he's lazy and complacent. I might have missed the fact that in the world information that Fido was actually supposed to be a pet, and instead, oh no, I did say it was a pet. But because perhaps because I personified him, it gave it more human-like characteristics. So with things like this, it's important to be very specific. So we'll say, instead of saying he resembles a mix between this and that, we'll just say Fido is your pet. We'll just say it's a pet grizzly bear. It's more specific, less confusing to the AI. I can't spell. We haven't observed that already. Okay. So let's undo our last action, and we'll see what it generates. Again, we're running into an issue where it's personifying Fido, it's having it talk. This could be a result of because we're using GPT-2. Are we using? No, actually, we're using GPT-3. But regardless, occasionally we'll run into this issue where it tries to personify things that aren't meant to be personified. Let's see if we can try to change the last action to something that's a bit more might coerce it into writing something about the fact that it's a grizzly bear rather than trying to talk to it. Let's try. So here we're going to try again this technique where we use like an incomplete sentence and see if it can we can guide the AI in the direction that we want. Basically, we're trying to get it to take a look at it. It's to observe it and describe what it looks like. Again, now it's looking at the window, looking out the window. Let's go back. Instead of trying to look out the window, let's see if we can. Let's try this instead. Okay, so here we go. We pat Fido on the head. He looks like he's considering tearing your throat out, something like a grizzly bear would do. And then Fido then starts talking and then says he's a dog. So, like I said, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to take a lot of playing around. That basically concludes the world information one. So, like with the memory one, mixed results. But at least it's able to contextually understand that it's like some sort of pet thing. It might not get it perfect every time. You're going to observe lots of weird behavior like this with the AI. And it's going to be a lot of just trying to dance around these things. So instead of saying like trying to try again and again and again to try to talk about it being a grizzly bear, we can just say he's just a bear. We can just directly edit that action instead. And that would probably be a lot easier than trying to redo every time because it's just messing up. So generally when it messes up small details like that, just change it. And then we can move on from there. But it's important that you actually go in and change it, because if you don't, then it will go on to continue thinking it's a dog forever. So that basically walks through the world information. Let's walk through, let's try to walk through like a world instead. So let's try it for you guys, what it would look like to create a new game. So there's worlds, prompts, there's a survival, which don't worry about that for now. There's a multiplayer and there's featured scenarios. So prompts are basically like scenarios where it's just like basically a small piece of text that you feed in to start the AI off on a particular story, describe a scene, and then some sort of small action in the storyline that you can begin to act on, like a signal that's occurring or some sort of disaster that you have to act upon. Generally, there needs to be something actionable. Worlds go into a bit more detail, try to create a little bit more detail and create a scene around a particular scenario. So it just basically goes a step beyond just a plain scenario. So we'll take a look at worlds really quick. So there's lots of different options here. Some of these are only going to be available to like premium people, or like if you pay extra money or whatever. We'll just start with this one and just take a look at it. So it goes on with all this backstory. We can just do, let's just do a quick start. Actually, we'll go back and we'll create a character instead. So I'm going to be a half demon, I guess. You could be a lizard man if you wanted, or something else. I'm going to be a bard. So basically, I like to sing to people. And we'll see if we can do something interesting here. Kadar is a world of dragons and demons and monsters. These dark creatures are constantly at war for control of the land, leaving the few human kingdoms in the shadow and dark, powerful force. But now the kingdoms of man are fighting back. So there's this scene, this backstory about this conflict. Oops, I did not mean to do that. There's this conflict between demons and humans. Basic backstory, and once it loads, we'll be able to see So there's these things called world events as well. Basically, this is another way of AI Dungeon trying to keep things interesting for you. So what it'll do is occasionally at some random set time, it'll introduce an event into the game, and you will then have to try and it'll insert that basically into the prompt, and you have to react based off of that event. You know, how does that change? It can change your story. You have to adapt to it. Here it says these dark forces are gaining more power, and people are marching off to battle to fight them. Okay, I'm some sort of half demon thing who's a member of some organization. Okay. Let's see if we can generate something else. Okay, so I have to battle some demonic forces. All right, great. Let's just try to go see if we can fight them. There's some battle that they were talking about. Great. We're in some city, and they talk about a capital, Kadarn, so some sort of bustling city. It can get kind of annoying if you click on these things. It'll keep popping up that dialog box. But large stone's walls are in perfect state of repair. Just going into some description about it. Let's ask around where the demons are. I don't know, something like that. Instead of do, let's try to stick with story. Okay, so here's a good example where this game analogy breaks down. Normally in a game, you would start the dialogue in the world with a clear place to take an action at. There will be a problem or an event that's occurring that you clearly need to react to. Maybe the game starts with, like in the space example, a signal that's beeping that you need to investigate. Or maybe there's a person that's walking up to you, handing you a note that you need to look at, and that note puts you at a quest. Here, though, all we got was that we need to battle some demonic forces, and it's not very clear where we go from there. So sometimes we need to come up with, we need to add to the story. This is where we are manufacturing. This is where it begins to resemble more like creative writing and storytelling than it does an actual game. So I say that we're going to seek out battle, and then I say, okay, why don't we wander about the city and see if we can come up with something interesting. And this will inevitably end up with some sort of storyline that we can go down. So now I say they were quickly directed to the barracks, and now we're looking at some sort of sergeant. Okay, let's talk to the sergeant and see what he says. So this is where you start to get creative, right? I just you could just say talk to the sergeant, and that would be really boring. But you could do that, and he would probably respond to something equally boring. Or you can start getting creative, start trying to give your character a personality. So you add descriptive language. Like you demand that the sergeant allows you to lead your forces to battle. It's a very bold approach to talking to this person, and maybe they'll likely get mad at us for it, and then it'll create something interesting and some conflict. But it's really important to try to inject creativity as much as you can. So obviously they kind of brush us off. They don't really they don't think that we're much. So we're going to try to show off our music abilities, because again, we're a bard, and we want to be able to show that, incorporate that into the story somehow. Sometimes when you interject some sort of interesting response like this, it could be kind of like, it may not make sense to you as like if you were reading a story, you read this, maybe it would seem a bit odd, but it makes it for a fun story. So I could talk about like playing my lute, which is kind of dumb and silly, but then you can get something like a smile and a nod. And so it's fun to see the way that the AI will react to this. Again, it's an AI. You can really do whatever you want. It tries to lead you in a direction of traditional sci-fi and fantasy, but you could really take it in any direction that you would like. I'm gonna demand that the sergeant allows me to take a battalion into battle, and armed only with my lute, and see what happens. Okay, so apparently it thinks that our lute's a weapon of mass destruction. Anyway, so you guys kind of get the point. You can kind of take this wherever you want, get as creative as you like. I recommend that, you know, you get really creative and try things out that you want. Don't play this game as if you're expecting the world to react to you. Try to incorporate interesting characteristics and fun parts in the game yourself. So for the next hour or two, I think we probably should check back at, let's see, right now it's 10 o'clock for me, which I think is about 7 o'clock for you guys. Let's try to check back at, I guess what would be like 8:30 for you guys, an hour and a half. Go around this website, play around with it, try some different scenarios out, and take some notes. So write down what your observations are. You've already seen some here where the AI fails. It doesn't, it will, for instance, personify a pet, or it'll take the story to a weird direction that you don't want. Write these things down, write your observations, and also write down things that you liked. Put down maybe in the chat, like you can write down particular quotes you thought were really funny or really interesting and informative. We'll check back at about 8:30, and then we can kind of have a quick discussion about what we observed and how we liked what happened.